morning to all of you. I hope you recovered from the late parties of yesterday evening and that you are all awake for this, let's say, first morning session. Thank you for giving me today the opportunity to speak with you. As, let's say, it was just reminded in the last months, I have presented the Alcatel progress in its turnaround, company that I just joined 8 months ago. In fact, to be really honest with you, I was appointed as CEO of Alcatel Lucent the day before Barcelona last year. So as you can imagine, I didn't show up because I was not yet completely ready. I hope I am a little bit more ready this year. We are, as a company, at a turning point, as it was, let's say, mentioned. But of course, I believe that the industry in which I am is really at a turning point as well, and that's what I would like to share with you this morning. In the last 5 years, and I guess that it was, let's say, presented in the film, so nothing really new there, we have observed a fantastic adoption of new broadband services and mobile devices. It has really deeply changed the human experience. And I believe, as I guess all of you in this room, that we are just at the beginning. We are on the cusp of an explosion of disruptive innovations such as wearables, sensors, 3D imaging and printing, advanced robotics, and automation of knowledge, to name just a few of them. And it really, let's say, changed the whole industry from the consumer side as well as from the enterprise side. These changes will drive more traffic in the networks that we do operate. A recent Bell Labs, which is our research laboratory, as you know, modeling study shows a 440% increase in metropolitan cloud and data center traffic between 2012 and 2017. As an industry, we have continued to build the networks using a legacy blueprint. We kept overlaying generation of specialized hardware, driving up unending cycles of expensive upgrades. In this context, service-aware IP routing has been obviously an improvement. However, we have now reached a turning point, and the only way to keep up will be a real structural change in the way we build our networks. We clearly, and I guess that it was, let's say, very well presented during this show, we clearly have to conceive the network differently to deliver the scale and the elasticity which is required for the development of the new applications. Web-scale companies are now building their own infrastructure, recognizing that cloud and network are necessary companions. Network providers are reaching the same conclusion, bringing IT and network to be a common agenda. As a consequence, it's time really for the network to adapt to this changing environment and to each end user. To achieve such a radical transformation, I believe that our industry has to address 5 major challenges. First challenge, which is the most obvious and which has been the one which was in play for the past few years, is the network needs to work around physical constraints to become even much faster. And I will give you a little bit of touch where we can still go in order to accelerate the network. Second, which is much more structural, is that network and cloud must now be integrated and become a real single entity. And that's probably what is really new for all of us in this industry. I used to be an operator as well, so which also requires to change the way we do operate our companies. Third, the network must become the sum of highly distributed clouds and smaller cells. So it's not just about, let's say, cloud. It's not just about centralization of the applications, but it's really about distributing all those applications within, let's say, distributed clouds and small cells in order to be able to deliver the right latency, the right quality of service, so the right, let's say, experience which is requested by the customers. Fourth, and that was, let's say, topic which was also addressed in, let's say, the first minutes of presentation, the network must become user-aware, leveraging big data, managing devices, content, and infrastructure. For many years, the device had to adapt to the network. It's clear that, let's say, in the years to come, the network will have to adapt to the devices and to the end user. And last but not least, but that's of course something which is quite obvious and which has been debated in all those sessions in the past few days, network must be highly secure to tackle advanced threats with innovative network functions. So if I quickly come back on, let's say, those 5 major items that I have just mentioned. First, network has to be faster. Network must keep up with the user insatiable desire for speed. Wireless bandwidth will be able to grow by probably more than 10 times in 5 years, and wireline bandwidth by more than 20 times. 1 terabit interface will be the norm in optical transport by 2019. We are today using 100 meg in the network, 100 gig, sorry, in the networks, moving to 400 gig, and so we see that 1 tera will be really the norm in just a few years from now. Major innovations will be also needed, improving both spatial and spectral efficiency while using new spectrum. LTE and LTE Advanced, combined with indoor and outdoor small cells, will allow optimal use of spectrum of any kind over any medium. In wireline, we will push vectoring further and again and also deliver 1 gigabit over copper. Let's think about, let's say, this plant of copper that we have used for ages, and let's say in the next coming quarters or years, we'll be able to push 1 gig on copper per, let's say, in the different countries in which we do operate. We will introduce as well 40 gig TWDM PON, allowing PON to be a real backhaul superhighway. But improving speed will require also improving the end-to-end performance. And that's where 5G is really kicking in. 5G will be a fully integrated cloud, wireless, and wireline architecture. And it would be restrictive to speak about 5G as just a wireless interface. That will be really an integrated infrastructure. IP routing and WDM will be more integrated with common SDN control, and these changes will also have massive impacts into energy and space savings. So that's for, let's say, what the technology will bring in terms of adding capacity. But you are going to tell me, okay, fine, but that's the old model. So that's where the second piece is really kicking in. We have seen in the last 2 years, and there was a lot of debate still until last year, but now it's really up and running. We have seen the network and the cloud becoming more integrated. The cloud has invited itself in the network. Network function virtualization allows cost reduction, but mainly greater velocity for the deployment of services, and which is really what we are looking for. We see an FV improving TCO by 40% and reducing, for example, IMS deployment time from more than 18 months to weeks or days, which is really going to change the full dynamic of the service providers. You can see a demonstration of voice over LTE using our virtual instance of IMS platform in our booth with device from AT&T. The network operators will also deploy a unified cloud platform, such as, let's say, the one that we have with, let's say, we have developed with our startup Cloudband in Israel, but of course there are other platforms of this kind. AT has made great standardization progress in this domain. So that's, let's say, one side of, let's say, the coin. But the network has also a lot to bring to data centers. So on one side, data centers have a lot to bring to the networks, but on the other side, networks have to bring to data centers. Today's data center must be shared amongst multiple tenants and support the rapid setup of many more diversified services. The legacy data switching in the data centers do not support well these new requirements. And that's where SDN solutions are kicking in, such as from our startup Nuage, and are disrupting this market using carrier-grade service-aware routing as we have introduced in the network a few years ago. First deployed with web-scale and large tech companies, they will become over time relevant to more enterprise, but also to network providers who have a major role to play in this transformation. The third, let's say, piece that I would like to highlight is that not only we'll see this integration in between cloud and network, but the network will be highly distributed, and which is another challenge for all of us. Distributed meaning cloud distributed and leveraging also smaller cells. Fiber is already moving closer to the end user. Small cells and distributed antennas are moving closer to the end user. The network morphs into this environment. This is just the beginning of a real complete change in architecture. The user consumption makes the data traffic to be much more local. It drives the global infrastructure to move to many distributed data centers much closer to the end user, because if we want to, let's say, cope with the latency which is requested by the services, of course, those data centers have to be as close as they can to the customers. With that shift, we will see the emergence of distributed cloud points of presence. These will act as the co-location points of FTTX headends, RAN pooling, virtualization, analytics, distributed caching, virtualized IMS, EPC, and CDN. Device functions will also be virtualized and hosted in the distributed cloud. The set-top box is a good example, with the hardware integrated in the TV sets and the remaining functions hosted in the network. As you can see, and I guess that, let's say, it's really important, we envision a radical redesign of the network, where in particular the cellular architecture, which we have inherited from the past few years as we know it today, will disappear over time, and to the benefit to a much more open user and service-centric architecture. And so I think that we are really at the edge of a very strong evolution of networks, with this disappearance of the cellular architecture towards this distributed cloud architecture. And probably that allows you to better understand the way I have orchestrated the redesign of Alcatel-Lucent to shift Alcatel-Lucent much more to IP, cloud, and of course ultra-broadband access, but to rebuild the network around what we see as the next stage of architecture. The fourth piece, and I am sure that some of my colleagues will come back in much more details on this, is that the network will be user-aware thanks to big data. With location and presence services, networks have started to provide valuable context-aware services that enhance the human experience and enable big data strategies. In the future, the network will constantly connect to us through more and more objects that we carry with us, meaning devices, sensors, or the vehicles that we are using. The massive amount of data and analytics gathered will create what I call a new digital skin, meaning that we will have around us a new digital skin which will be connected to the network on a permanent basis, and which will give enough information to the network in order for the network to adapt to each end user and really become user-centric and data-aware. It will allow the network to proactively improve our own experience and enable network providers to capture value with differentiated services. And I'm sure that my colleagues from, let's say, the operator side will explain how they will leverage that. Bell Labs, for example, is today experimenting context-aware solutions that provide 7 times better performance in wireless video delivery by just, let's say, looking at where are the users in a cell in terms of, let's say, video usage and adjusting the traffic depending on what type, let's say, of users we have around, let's say, the cell. I see an increasing convergence between devices, network, and cloud. The network will directly manage multiple devices and gather their feedback. The network will also host virtualized devices functions, as I already mentioned, in order to improve their cross-working, which we have dreamt for ages. Sensors, machines, video delivery will become essential elements of this enhanced user awareness by the network. It will drive a uniform user experience across the multiple screens and the multiple services that will be delivered to the customers. As a consequence, service providers will quickly expand in 2014 the use of big data capabilities, either improving their customers' experience, which I believe is the first use of big data for service providers, or creating new revenue streams with new models. I'm sure we'll come back on that during the, let's say, the discussion, as some operators such as Verizon have done recently, let's say, during the Super Bowl. All this can only happen, and that's the last transformation of the network, if we as individuals and organizations can trust the network. And I think that this point has been highly debated during the past few days. Cybersecurity has become a major issue for all countries, combining legal, technical, geopolitical, and regulatory aspects. With the cloud network globalization, security attacks are global, multi-coordinated, and sophisticated. First and foremost, global cross-sector collaboration is needed to reduce threats while maintaining the privacy of the end users. And I guess that all of us in the industry have called for this collaboration in between the different players in order to really fight against that. Governments and the different private industry players must work together to provide balanced frameworks to secure the network from cyber crimes. But also, our research shows that the network itself is a major enabler to provide protection against security threats. For instance, current boundaries can be pushed by implementing on-the-fly encryption for optical transport, by providing advanced network-enabled solutions for device management, and we have some colleagues which will present, I'm sure, things in that area, or rolling out malware detection based on smart network analytics, as we already do today. I really urge all of us, meaning I really urge the industry to work together, coming from both IT and network worlds. Alcatel Lucent has recently fostered such collaborations. We started with HP a few years ago. I announced last year a major effort with Qualcomm to further push the small cells innovation. At this Mobile World Congress, we unveiled with Intel another major industry partnership to speed up the virtualization of network functions. This will definitively give each partner a leading edge and time advantage in enabling new distributed and virtualized architecture. Such preeminent progress will ultimately help the service providers to differentiate rather than focus on pricing competition. I stressed in the last months, and let's say, reiterate it once more in front of you, I stressed that a virtuous ecosystem in the digital world has been established, for example, in North America in the past few years, meaning big investments in network in IT creating a strong digital ecosystem which allows service providers to really differentiate on new services and new plays, enabling, let's say, those service providers, of course, to deliver good margins and then to invest again in infrastructure, which is the blood of the economic growth. Unfortunately, we are not yet there in Europe, where we are still, let's say, embedded in what I would call the vicious circle, meaning not enough investments in networks and IT, driving, let's say, a very poor digital ecosystem, driving some, let's say, pressure on service providers, which have no other way than to compete on price rather than to compete on innovation. So if I have to make a plea, I make a plea that Europe will embrace in the next coming quarters the same dynamic which is at play today in the US and which starts also to be in play in Asia. And I am sure that if all, let's say, the players in Europe do the same, we'll have the same dynamic taking place there and we'll see the same innovation flourishing in Europe. That's what I am expecting and looking for. I thank you.